Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. I know I said that we would be taking Wednesday off, but with this week, that was never going to happen. Let's jump in. The United States has dramatically escalated its trade war with China by imposing a new wave of tariffs. The Trump administration has added a 50% increase on a wide range of goods imported from the People's Republic of China, with even steeper penalties announced shortly after. At noon Eastern Time on Tuesday, the 104% tariff came into effect, according to a statement from the White House press secretary, in response to what Washington views as continued retaliation by Beijing. Starting Wednesday, today, these 104% tariffs, as well as higher rates, will be collected, intensifying the already historic levels of economic pressure between the two nations. In a related executive order released late on Tuesday, the administration also raised the so-called de minimis tariff from 30% to 90%, aiming to prevent importers from circumventing the new levies through loopholes. Taken together, tariffs on many Chinese goods now approach or exceed 120%. This marks a critical inflection point in the US-China trade relationship. Analysts warn that without a negotiated retreat, the current measures could trigger a major decoupling between the world's two largest economies, with ripple effects felt across global supply chains. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called China's latest escalation a, quote, big mistake, end quote, stating that, quote, they are playing with a pair of twos, end quote, making a poker analogy. Bessent emphasized the imbalance in the trade exposure, noting that the United States exports far less to China than it imports. In 2024, China exported over $500 billion to the United States. Despite outreach to other nations like Japan and South Korea, Beijing has shown no indication of re-engaging in trade talks. On the Chinese side, tensions remain high. General Secretary Xi Jinping has not made a public appearance since early April, though reports suggest key meetings may be underway. His past visits to rare earth facilities have been interpreted as signaling potential export restrictions, a move that could escalate tensions further. Meanwhile, Beijing finds itself with limited retaliatory options. Chinese advisors privately admit that surrender would be seen as weakness, but note that few viable alternatives exist. Many traditional export markets are saturated or wary of Chinese goods. Efforts to diversify toward Southeast Asia and Europe have had very limited success, especially as global economic growth slows. Regular viewers of China Update will know that China is grappling with several structural issues within its economy, one of the key ones being chronic overcapacity. You'll know too that exports for the last few years have been one of the few areas of healthy growth in the economy, and now they have likely lost access to their biggest export market. Now, while many in Beijing recognize this privately, publicly, official responses from Beijing indicate no intention to de-escalate. Chinese authorities and influential voices across media and academia have firmly rejected any suggestion of backing down, framing the latest tariff threats as aggressive and reckless. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs was unequivocal. Quote, if the US decides not to care about the interests of the US itself, China, and the rest of the world, China's response will continue to the end, end quote. Echoing the defiance, the Ministry of Commerce declared that, quote, China will resolutely implement countermeasures, end quote, if the US proceeds, describing the move as further evidence of American intimidation tactics. Experts within China are also advising caution against early negotiations. Wu Xinbo of Fudan University in Shanghai noted that many in Beijing believe it would be unwise to seek talks now, expressing today, quote, some people here believe that we should not seek negotiations right away. Eventually, Trump will be under a ton of pressure and is maybe willing to negotiate with China, and by then, China will be in a better position to bargain. If we offer to negotiate right now, that plays into Trump's hands, end quote. Meanwhile, potential retaliatory measures are being circulated widely online. Suggestions include suspending cooperation on fentanyl, slashing agricultural imports from the US, and targeting sectors such as IP revenues and services. While unofficial, the traction these ideas have gained indicates a public and policymaker appetite for firm responses. It's even been suggested that Beijing ban American films. As a side note, US films have been limited in China for many years, one of the many non-tariff barriers Beijing has erected against the US, which the US administration is now seeking to respond to. Prominent Chinese commentator Min Jinwei has called for even bolder actions, pivoting to yuan-based trade, here referring to the Chinese currency, reducing US debt holdings, and even stepping up military posture. Quote, "It rains when heaven deems fit," end quote, Min wrote, quoting an old Chinese saying, adding, quote, "All China can do is respond actively," end quote. With the tariff hike now set to take effect, the battle lines have hardened. Neither side shows signs of retreat, and the global consequences of this deepening trade war may soon be felt far beyond Washington and Beijing. We are currently living through a turning point in history. If you want to follow all the relevant developments as they happen every day, maybe consider subscribing to China Update, and you will be on top of the most up-to-date news and analysis as it happens. If you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you would like to support independent YouTube channels like this is a one-man band. I write, film, edit, upload, and manage everything, and I rely primarily on subscriber support. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Chinese markets plunged on Wednesday morning as investors reacted to the tariff escalation news. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index sank 3.2% shortly after opening, while the Hang Seng Technology Index plummeted 5.42%. Mainland shares also suffered, with the CSI 300 index falling 1.2%. Interestingly, soon after this initial opening drop, Beijing signaled support for technology firms, fueling a slight reversal of some of these losses. Currency markets also reflected growing anxiety. The offshore renminbi dropped to an all-time low of 7.4242 per US dollar, while the onshore yuan midpoint was set by the People's Bank of China at 7.2038, its weakest level since 2023. The central bank has now allowed the yuan to weaken for 5 consecutive days, a move seen by analysts as an effort to ease the economic blow from the US tariffs. China's 10-year benchmark yield dipped to 1.65% as investors sought safety in government bonds. The broader market shift suggests growing concerns over capital flight and further trade turbulence. Goldman Sachs noted that while the Chinese government still prioritizes foreign exchange stability, its current strategy appears focused on managing the pace of depreciation rather than targeting a fixed exchange rate. Analysts warn that a continued drop in the currency could disrupt global trade, potentially triggering competitive devaluations by other economies and further escalating tensions with Washington. However, with tariffs now over 100%, Beijing cannot devalue its way out of this problem without crippling its own economy. Economic models from Goldman Sachs released yesterday project that new 50% tariffs could shave nearly an additional full percentage point off China's 2025 GDP growth. The impact of these tariffs layered on top of those from previous administrations, as well as the earlier Liberation Day tariffs, now threaten to upend a trade relationship that has long served as a stabilizing force between Washington and Beijing, and plunge China into a much deeper economic crisis. Now, for part 3 of today's video, let's move now to Europe. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Chinese Premier Li Qiang held a high-level phone call on Tuesday, addressing growing concerns over US tariff policies and their global impact. According to the Chinese government's readout, Premier Li criticized Washington's, quote, tariff abuse, end quote, calling it a, quote, typical act of unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bullying, end quote. He stressed China's determination to defend its development interests and international trade norms, while reaffirming Beijing's commitment to continued opening up and cooperation with global partners, including the EU. The readout also quotes von der Leyen as expressing similar disapproval of US actions, stating that the tariffs, quote, have seriously impacted international trade, end quote, and harmed both the EU and China. However, the European Commission's own account struck a much more nuanced tone. Von der Leyen emphasized the need for, quote, a negotiated resolution, end quote, to prevent further escalation, and stressed Europe and China's shared responsibility to uphold a fair, rules-based trading system. She also highlighted concerns over possible trade diversion stemming from the tariffs, particularly in sectors burdened by overcapacity. The two leaders discussed establishing a mechanism to monitor such shifts and ensure proactive responses. While China may hope to rally the EU into a united front against the US, the diplomatic reality appears more cautious. European officials are increasingly wary of becoming an inadvertent dumping ground for Chinese exports displaced by US tariffs. The EU recently announced a new task force to monitor trade diversion and has hinted at safeguard measures should China fail to cooperate. While some commentators around the world argue that US tariffs will push the EU and China closer together, the fact of the matter is, the EU for years has already been concerned with Chinese overcapacity, accusations of dumping in Europe, and on top of that, the US market is far bigger than China's. Both the EU and China need countries to sell to, and neither can replace the size or dynamism of the US consumer market. And further complicating the picture, Ukrainian President Zelensky revealed yesterday, Tuesday, that 2 Chinese nationals were captured fighting alongside Russian forces. It's reported that the 2 Chinese fighters, aged 33 and 31, had both been recruited by Russian military officials to sign up as contract soldiers. This would mark the first confirmed instance of Chinese citizens participating in combat against Ukraine, risking further strain on Beijing's relations with Europe. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop observed on the development today, quote, "There is no evidence so far that they are anything more than mercenaries, and some PRC citizens have fought for Ukraine. But obviously, any possibility that the PRC has sent troops to help the Russians would be a massive problem. But I am skeptical Beijing would be that reckless and stupid." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. If you appreciated this extra episode, don't forget to hit the like button. I hope you got some value from it. This week is going to be a busy week. There will definitely be another episode tomorrow. Make sure you're subscribed so you get that when it's released. Thank you again for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all for another episode tomorrow.